All right, so we've been talking a little bit about history here. We're getting back to it after a brief pause. And kind of cast your mind's eye back to Western Europe. So merry old England. Northern Europe that is busy transitioning through the Dark Ages, surviving through the Dark Ages from the Germanic tribes and becoming nation states like Prussia and so forth. So we're not quite to the Renaissance. We're not quite to the Christopher Columbuses and Magellans and everybody circumnavigating the globe or killing brown people with a whole bunch of European diseases and stuff like that yet. We're still kind of in that Robin Hood era before all that. We're kind of in the Crusades era, so the 1000 to about 1450 time frame, okay? And in this time frame, we don't have steam power yet. Horsepower is literal, actual horsepower and so forth. So, although work and effort required to do stuff like grow, prepare, and consume food takes a lot of time and basic human effort. So, there's not a whole lot of surplus capacity. There's not a lot of bottled up energy in the form of petroleum fuels to get us to places like Yosemite, which won't exist for another 700 or 800 years at this point, depending on where we dip our toe into the timeline. So instead, we have much more close to home forms of forest and outdoor recreation. We have this thing in Western Europe called the journeyman system. So if you are not one of the about 90% of people that are living directly on the land and essentially subsistence farming, and a little bit off the top gets skimmed off and sent over to your feudal landlord, the person who runs the manor in charge of your area, and they skim off a chunk of their profit, and that goes to whatever king or queen is in charge at the time. And the history of England, for example, alone has this bizarre and Byzantine and rapid succession of king, 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 queen, queen, king, 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 Vikings, king, 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 and so on and so forth. It's a lot. And so it's enough for people to just kind of make it through this time. The Vikings are conquering the British Isles so hard through this period, between, kind of 800 and about 1300, that they're changing the language that people speak. This is how English gets imported into the British Isles from essentially Germany and the Danish and the Scandinavians and stuff like that. So, it's hard. And if you're not getting conquered or carried off during a Viking excursion, and you're not one of the 90% of everybody just like growing food and a couple of goats and having meat in your diet like once, maybe twice a month if you're pretty fancy, you might be in a village or town, or they don't really have cities at the scale we think of cities today, but what to them was a fairly large city like Carbondale would have been a pretty sprawling metropolis back in the day. We have folks signing on as young children to be apprentices, typically males, of course, and in this time. And the apprentice is the one up at 3:30, 4 in the morning, stoking the blacksmith's furnace. So the master smith is, an adult, highly trained, and so forth. They take on one or more apprentices, typically. You gotta understand, there's a lot of orphans all around Europe at this time. The Black Plague is going to wipe out so many people, up to 50% or 60% of a given village's population, so much that people had to start migrating to just replace dead people so that there were enough people to work the land and keep everybody else alive. All right? Life was nasty, brutish, and short in this time. So, you might be a kid from this little village or this little farming hovel over here. Hovel is like a cluster of several houses kind of thing, not even really a village. Just a settled spot in the European landscape. And maybe your parents die of the ague, or imbalanced humors, any sickness that they thought boiled down to the 4 humors. Aqueous, bilious, vitreous, I forget the 4th humor. Anyway, basically the fluids in your body were humors. So like digestive fluid, blood, and so on. Let's say your parents die, and so you go to be an apprentice the next village over to the blacksmith, and after a whole bunch of years of getting up at dark 30 in the morning and stoking the blacksmith's furnace, you might get to accelerate or jump up to the level of journeyman. So if an apprentice is like getting a high school education or a junior high school or elementary school education, journeyman is like getting, at that time, the equivalent of a high school education. You're starting to learn how to make nails out of bar stock or billet stock. You're starting to learn how to make horseshoes and how to get those shoes on the horse without getting kicked in the chest and getting hard rebooted and so forth. And after a bunch of years of that, to the point that you master those skills, you graduate from journeyman to a master smith in that case, or a master cooper if you make barrels, or a master cobbler if you make shoes or whatever. And so this is hard work, right? So this is like going to vocational school in high school, or like an associate's degree kind of a thing, and then becoming like the blacksmith for the village is like getting a master's degree. So we see this sense, this progression is like 1,000 years old of getting an undergrad degree and then a graduate degree, like a master's degree, okay? So, it's kind of a work hard, play hard kind of a thing according to records that we have. So, journeymen have a lot of surplus energy at times because they aren't always the folks having to get up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning to stoke that furnace, get things running on coal or coke nice and hot so you can do some smithing. They're working hard all day every day, but they start to, as villages start to grow into towns start to grow into cities, places like London and Paris get bigger and bigger. There's this sense of, okay, we've got a little bit of surplus time and energy and so forth, and enough of that agricultural produce, that surplus food, calories basically, get into cities, so we have some energy to burn off. And journeymen start to arrange, kind of coalesce into fraternities. This is part of the origin of Greek letter organizations, fraternities. So imagine like the leather workers guild. It's all the professionals, all the masters in that field across a city or a region. And they help set prices, set professional practices and standards and stuff like that. And then we've got fraternities at the journeyman level, and these guys are getting together, and we start to get this culture of stuff like secret meetings and handshakes and inter-trade brawls. So if you don't have fancy quick dry fabrics and Vibram boot sole boots to go backpacking in, and you're living in like 12th century Paris, you got a little bit of time and energy on your hands, you like go to let's say you're a blacksmith journeyman. You go to like the secret blacksmith journeyman fraternity meeting, and you're like, did you see the way those cobblers were, I don't know how you'd say it these days, giving us the side eye? Is that Zoomers? I don't think. All right. And so you gather at your bar, tavern, and get all liquored up, and then go to the leatherworkers journeyman fraternity tavern and beat the bejesus out of them and be like, Smiths rule, tanners drool. And so this became like a more and more formal thing, to the point that it got visible, it got recorded by historians. Like, this is what people were doing for fun because not a whole lot of better options. We don't have public parks at this time. That doesn't exist. National parks, not a thing, won't be a thing for centuries. City parks, not really a thing either, because these places are growing without much like central planning, and so there's not green spaces in the middle of these settled spaces because everybody's heating with wood. And so if there are any trees around, it's going to get cut down sooner rather than later to just keep people alive through the winter so that they can boil some water, so that they can sterilize their water and not die from uncontrollable explosive diarrhea, right? So it's either uncontrollable explosive diarrhea or barroom brawls. That's a thing. Oxford around this time, that august, one of the very first universities in the world, it's about 1,000 years old at this point. Oxford and Cambridge, super old educational institutions. They're trying to teach people, prepare people for a life as monks or nobles or educated scribes and stuff like that. Historians, writers of all stripes. They outlaw stuff like soccer, which they called football, and still do. In that case, in that culture, recreation was seen as, or soccer was seen as a genuinely violent and dangerous thing, right? So if you're slide tackling people now and you got to carry somebody off the field, right? Half of soccer players are just falling because, the wind blew the wrong direction, right? I mean, soccer players get injured a lot. They're pretty good at taking a fall. But back then, we don't have antibiotics. So you slide tackle somebody and their shin bone's sticking out, like, that's a life-threatening injury. They're probably going to lose that leg, and they're probably going to lose their life. So we have things like colleges, universities outlawing intramural sports because it was seen as like a moral excess to the side of violence. Things are pretty different back then. What is okay, at least in their eyes, was a whole raft of religious festivals. So up until the 1500s, the Catholic Church is essentially the one quasi-unifying force across all of Western Christendom, all of Europe, parts of North Africa. This was the big thing that kind of tried to glue everybody together with a shared set of morals, a shared worldview and beliefs and stuff like that. And one thing the Catholic Church was always really good at was, as we'd say these days, extending and embracing. So evangelizing to Scandinavians, Germanic tribes, the Celts and the Gauls out along the British Isles and stuff like that, and saying, okay, so we have this particular worldview, this guy Jesus, all this stuff. You have some holy days that might be like our modern Halloween. It's based on Samhain, a totally pagan festival. It gets turned into the night before All Hallows Eve. All Saints Day is the next day, November 1st. And as a result of the Catholic Church springing up basically as the Roman Empire, so Catholic Church on the rise as the Roman Empire is getting ready to collapse, and so forth, they're even taking some Roman holy days, like feasts, festivals, this thing called Saturnalia, which was kind of like this, ended up late in the game being kind of this Roman pagan orgy thing. Some folks are super into that. So the Christian church was like, let's make maybe like take 10-15% off the top there, squirrel it in, but let's keep this on the calendar as a holiday. Christmas is built out of Yule. The timing for Christmas is built out of essentially a Norse holiday. So that's the kind of leisure, that's the kind of fun that people can have. So in other traditional cultures that have not collapsed and gone away, like in modern day Japanese culture, on average there is more than one day a week that is like a federal U.S. holiday. Everybody gets that day off, but on the other days they are working until 10, 11 at night. So there's a whole lot of holidays going on. There's a whole lot of barroom brawls going on. Not a lot of soccer going on. And there's a whole lot of bored farm animals nearby. So we get games at some of these festivals like bull baiting. Does anybody want to venture a guess as to what bull baiting is? It's the medieval version of not hold my beer, although they were drinking a lot of beer in the Middle Ages. Hold my mead, and I'm going to jump this fence and basically see if I can... It's like a very assertive form of cow tipping. And you can imagine a lot of people getting thrown or gored or trampled. Like, that's the kind of fun people had available at that time, okay? Because we don't have stuff like parks. Because we don't have stuff like national forests. And forests are like the Black Forest of Germania and later Germany and Prussia and stuff like that. That's a dangerous place, right? So there's not a forester as a profession. There are woodsmen who chop firewood at the edge of the big dark forest, and you don't go in there because if you think back to Grimm's fairy tales, what's in the woods? Fucking everything, right? And it all has claws. So, our sense of the natural world, our sense of our relationship, our place in that natural world is, okay, jumping into the bull paddock and just tearing it up with a bull who has nothing better to do and is just like, try me, is a better idea, a more appealing idea, and certainly a much more accessible idea than going into the forest for fun. Make sense? So we have a completely different sense of what fun is, what leisure should look like, what we should spend our free and discretionary time and effort and calories on versus some of our own ancestors. Like, paradigm shift difference. Complete difference in a lot of ways, okay? So, out of this we get hints about what this was like, not directly. Nobody was writing histories of national parks at that time because that wasn't even an idea they'd thought up yet. We get quotes out of things like different guilds and how they would enter into contracts with apprentices and journeymen. So you get quotes like, taverns and alehouses he shall not haunt, dice, cards, or any other unlawful games he shall not use, fornication with any women he shall not commit, matrimony with any woman he shall not contract, he shall not absent himself by day or by night without his master's leave, but be a true and faithful servant. So if you ever feel like it's kind of annoying when your boss tries to send you a text message on your day off and be like, hey, can you come in today? We're a little bit short. And you're like, no, this is my day off. Mark that as unread. Pretty different sense here, right? No smoking, no chewing, no drinking, no chasing the women who do. You can't get married as an apprentice or journeyman. They get that level of say over your life. And that would never fly these days, right? We're not here for that. So, things really pretty different in some ways. But that was the trade-off you made in order to become a skilled tradesperson or craftsperson. Okay. Or in that era, a craftsman. Okay. So a little bit later, in the 1700s, we're going to get quotes from luminaries like Ben Franklin. You might have heard of him. On drinking. This is a direct quote from the man himself, or about the man himself. He drank every day a pint before breakfast, a pint at breakfast with his bread and cheese, a pint between breakfast and dinner, lunch, a pint at dinner, a pint in the afternoon about 6 o'clock, and another when he had done his day's work. Like, that's fine. You know, that's 5-6 beers throughout the day, which is a lot for somebody like me. I'm a cheap date, and like 1 or 2 beers and I'm good. But that's every day. right? The water is not safe to drink, and they don't know why. It's just people get sick. We have no germ theory of illness yet. So this is a big thing, and it shapes classes. Now, we've talked about the 90%, the serfs, who are doing cottage recreation with family, the immediate family, doing stuff like bull baiting occasionally, going to the local Catholic churches or the parish festival of whatever holy day is like the next one after the last one, which was a day ago. What are the elites doing? The landed, the wealthy, the nobles, the knights, the kings and queens and their families and so forth. They have it very different. Bless you. What kings and queens used to enjoy as a matter of deep privilege is significantly less than what you and I, as well, okay, I'm not going to say you're filthy plebs, I'm saying I am, okay? We have it way better than a lot of royalty used to. Let's go through some of this. So, elite classes, so clergy, scholars, royalty, warriors, knights in particular. They enjoyed a whole other class of things that were not even legal for other people to do in certain places. So, if you think back to the story of Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest, right? Robin Hood is there on purpose or by accident? Does Robin Hood choose to live in Sherwood Forest, or does he just kind of find himself there? Anybody remember? So in the old stories, Robin Hood comes back from fighting the Crusades with King Richard. Robin Hood was a landed elite, a crusading knight, like top of the top of the pops, as Dre used to say. Okay? But he comes home, and King Richard is still off fighting in the Crusades. Robin Hood is wounded, he comes back to convalesce, and King Richard's younger brother, Prince John, the evil Prince John, has kind of taken over the show in King Richard's absence. And while Robin of Locksley is away fighting Islamic folks over in Jerusalem and so forth, depending on which crusade, Prince John has swept Robin of Locksley's holdings, claimed it by royal right, and said, all right, all that stuff you got, that's mine now. That's fair game for royalty in that time. The divine right of kings means each of these kings and princes or regents were installed by God, and they get to do whatever they feel like because their word is literally law. And it's law because God put them there. So, pretty serious stuff. So Robin of Locksley arrives, shows up to Locksley family grounds and castle to find that it's either, depending on the version, been destroyed because Prince John just didn't like the Locksleys, or because Prince John has moved in there and sort of taken it over. So Robin Hood is living in Sherwood Forest as a refugee. Sherwood Forest is one of the Kingswood Preserves. It's like a national park, and the entire visitation is the king and his retinue for stuff like hart hunting, H-A-R-T, deer hunting, or fox hunting in the fields and meadows around the forest. And there are so many other people that are getting screwed by this system that it's not just Robin of Locksley adopting this sort of steal from the rich, give to the poor persona. It's a whole band of merry men. And Mary is kind of whitewashing it, right? So if you had to live in Thompson Woods because the chancellor took over your dorm room and you have to poach deer and live in the woods full time, you might not be such a merry man or woman or person or whatever. So things were different. Some people get to do stuff and nobody else does. And so pretty quickly, Prince John gets wind of this, like treasury carriages carrying money from one place to another, generally towards Prince John. They start getting intercepted, and Robin of Locksley and this band of hooded folks, Will Scarlet, Friar Tuck, all these, they start dispersing those funds back to the poor and stuff like that. And so they become Fugitive number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so forth. And then we get this Kevin Costner movie, and he's naked, and it's awkward. But, solid performances all around. Anyway, so this is a thing. Among the elites, we have the emergence of codified rules of behavior around leisure. We call them today chivalry, which is from the French for chevalier, being a horseman. So we have this idea of knightly conduct, of chivalry, of protecting the weak and enforcing justice and following and seeking after God and stuff like that. All of that's getting sort of pulled together for the first time around this time and hooked to religion, spirituality, the church, God, hooked to the landed elites, the knights, and then hooked to the broader populace's sense of what is good and what's legal and who gets to do things like tournaments and stuff like that and who doesn't. So we'll end it there for today and pick it up on Thursday and see how far through history we can get. Sound good? All right.